Hello and welcome to Recipes Recommended. Today we will dive into two easy to make dips we really love. One's hot, one's cold. The first recipe that we're going to make today is guacamole. It's easy, comes compliments of Rick Bayless's Authentic Mexican, a book that my wife Lisa got about 20 years ago, I think. But this is just a basic take on a basic dip. When you make guacamole or work with avocados, you have to make sure the avocados are ripe. And the best way to do this is to push a finger against the bulbous end of the avocado. If it's soft, it means the rest of the fruit is ripe. The easiest way to remove the seed is to take a sharp knife, cut lengthwise, and then twist open. You're going to reveal the seed, and to get it out, take the heel of that knife and tap it into the seed. Twist, and it pops right out. The recipe we're following calls for 3 avocados, but 2 typically make enough guacamole for 2 to 4 people, so we adjusted the ingredient amounts. Once you scoop out the flesh into the bowl, you should add seasoning. I usually use 1 lime for every 2 avocados, which will prevent the guacamole from turning brown, and about a 1/4 teaspoon of salt to taste. Remember that the flavors will deepen if you refrigerate overnight. Once these ingredients were all together, we used a potato masher and smashed it until we got a chunky consistency. Our next ingredient is onion. We're going to take half a medium-sized onion and rough dice it because this is a chunky guacamole. You're going to make some horizontal slices and then some vertical slices before the final dice. Please take note that the cutting board is sliding around. It's not that the knife isn't sharp, it's that I forgot to put a wet paper towel under the cutting board. This is important because anchoring your cutting board with a wet paper towel creates some stability, and it'll also make it safer when making these cuts. The last thing that you want to do is slip and cut your fingers or knuckles. Trust me. This recipe calls for tomato, and when looking at recipes I noticed that only about half the recipes I looked at included them. Tomatoes add more acidity and brightness, not to mention a little more texture. I cut 2 thick slices and ran my knife through them, turned them 90 degrees and ran my knife through them again for a dice roughly the same size of the onion. If you're lucky enough to have access to heirloom tomatoes, I'd certainly recommend experimenting with different varieties because you're going to get sweeter and more acidic varieties. For cilantro, we're going to ball it up and rough chop. This is my preferred method when chopping soft herbs. You can chop as fine as you like, but I like to see some big pieces of cilantro. It's a delicious herb and it wouldn't be guacamole without it. Now add the onions, cilantro, and tomato to the avocado mixture. Using a rubber spatula, fold the ingredients together, trying not to mash the diced tomatoes. It's a good time now to adjust for seasoning with salt, pepper, and maybe a little bit of extra lime juice. You can go ahead and serve this dip now, or you can wrap it up with a little bit of cellophane and keep it in the fridge for up to 3 days. Our second dip is a cheesy and creamy chickpea recipe. This one, when we first made it, surprised us at the depth of flavor. We love it, and it's super easy to make. I really love recipes that start with melting butter and oil. You know what you're making is going to be good. We start with adding the rest of the onion that we diced for the guacamole recipe, cooking over medium heat. Our induction stovetop runs hot, so to play it safe, I always recommend cooking at a slightly lower temperature than the recipe recommends. You can always raise the temperature from there. We aren't trying to put too much color on the onions, we just want them golden. Time to add the garlic. Cook until fragrant. Most recipes, including the one that we're working from, say to cook for about 1 minute. But again, to be safe, I usually err on the side of around 30 seconds or less. Otherwise, you run the risk of burning the garlic. Next up is the flour, which will act as kind of a thickener and a binder for this dip. Cook the rawness out of it, as always, like you're making a roux. Then comes cayenne, Dijon mustard, and horseradish. An incredible and familiar aroma struck me when these ingredients hit the pan, and although I couldn't place it, it made me think of my mom's cooking from when I was a kid. Finally, it's time to add the main ingredient, canned chickpeas. Now is also the time to add the cooking liquid and a dash of cayenne. Here the recipe calls for vegetable stock, but feel free to use whatever you have, including water. We will cook the chickpeas until they start to fall apart, and the stock has thickened up a bit, about 5 minutes. As a side note, you can definitely use canned chickpeas as the recipe is written, and we definitely are here, but in the future I certainly will be making this with dried chickpeas for no other reason than to see if there are any noticeable differences. Add water and deglaze to loosen the fond which is developed on the bottom of the pan. That's flavor, dude, and you don't want to lose it. You may have to do this a couple of times. The recipe mentions this, but I needed to do this twice. I used about a half a cup of water total. I love cream cheese, seriously. Obviously great on bagels, but also on everything else. Here it acts as a base flavor, which imparts a tang and a touch of sourness. In my opinion, the Monterey Jack cheese is more body and some smoothness. It makes a ton of sense to use them together, and I'm definitely going to try this combo in other dishes like mac and cheese and omelets. Season with salt and pepper. Then you can transfer, as I have, to 2 small cast iron pans, or you can just bake the dip in the same pan we've been working with. Sprinkle a generous amount of Parmesan cheese on top and pop into a 400-degree oven for about 15 minutes. Once the dip is ready, it will be bubbling and gooey in the best kind of way. At this point, you can sprinkle some chili flakes and or chopped parsley. We found the best vehicle to get this dip into your mouth was pita chips. But find what works for you. Celery or carrot sticks would also work great. We were able to make both dips in less than an hour, which makes them both recommended for a delicious and easy dip. These recipes came from books we own, with a few minor tweaks. If you're interested, I will add a link to both of these in the description for the video. If you like this video and want to see more, please consider subscribing and commenting below, especially if you have any recipes you want to recommend. We'd love to try them out, and maybe make a video. Thanks again, and remember, great minds eat alike.